Postal workers are already voicing their disapproval of the changes brought by Trump donor and appointee Louis Dejoy, who has, in the face of challenges to the fiscal health of the post office, is introduced massive cost-cutting measures. So now, this is according to an article in Business Insider. The U.S. Postal Service has seen a stark decline in Americans using their service, and even more so with the pandemic. In fact, between April and June, the USPS has recorded a net loss of about $2.2 billion. DeJoy is a Trump donor, which I keep pointing out because that matters. Okay, you don't get anywhere in this government, and let's be fair, this happens a lot in other administrations as well. But you don't get anywhere unless you donate lots of money to the candidate. Now, normally it's like a ambassadorship or some other posting. In this case, it's Postmaster General. So now DeJoy is also a big Republican donor or Republican fundraiser. And so he's deep into Republican politics. And as you're going to see, he basically uses that that perspective as a Republican to try to dismantle the post office. So now what he's done is scrapped overtime. He's gotten rid of, mail sorting machines, did a lot of collection of collection boxes. And so he's done a lot of harm to the post office. And that's a lot of that is going to help Donald Trump, by the way. And so now internally, he's also scrapped a lot of overtime and has made it very difficult for people who work at the post office to actually do their job. So now the people affected, as I said, by these cuts are the workers. So now, okay, the workers aren't just affected, right, the most. It's actually people who, need to receive life-saving medicine through the mail and people who rely on the mail to deliver their checks. Nonetheless, right, we'll go to the workers now, who don't get talked about enough. Kevin Servin, for example, worked as a U.S. Postal mail carrier in Buffalo, Minnesota. He then left after the Postmaster General Louis DeJoy's cost-cutting measures eliminated overtime at his local office. Now, Servin, 31, said of the unrealistic pressures for him and his fellow employees to do their jobs, quote, "It's been ugly." Now, look, paid at an hourly wage at the post office, Servin relied on overtime, often working around 60 hours a week to support his wife and 4-year-old daughter. He said he needed those hours to cover rent, health insurance, and monthly car payments. Now think about that, right? He's a government worker, right? Public worker, I should say. And he doesn't make enough to survive in Minnesota. He just doesn't. And that's working, again, 40 hours a week. So now you might think, okay, well, let's raise wages, right? I'm sure the post office would love to, except the post office is operating, well, let's just say they're operating at a loss, okay? And I'll explain why. So now he said the minute the word started coming down from the up top that they're cutting overtime, it became unsustainable for me to support a family. So again, they can't pay people well because, for one, they're not a for-profit entity, right? And for two, they have other obligations. So now, and by the way, they also do not get federally funded. All right. They're not federally funded. And so what they do is that they make their money off mainly postage and packages. Originally, it was normal mail, but then again, you've had the reduction in the amount of snail mail, as we call it. So now they were actually doing pretty good until 2006, right? So that's when Republicans under George W. Bush passed the Postal Accountability and Enhancement Act of 2006. That's when things really started going downhill. That act gave the Postal Service new accounting and funding rules for its retiree pensions and health benefits. So look, part of what you get paid at the post office was generous benefits, right? So now up until 2006, those benefits were funded on a pay-as-you-go basis, pulling out of its pension fund and adding to it as retiree costs came in. But that legislation required the Postal Service to calculate all of its likely pension costs over the next 75 years. And then put away enough money between 2007 and 2016 to cover most of that. That is a burden that no other entity or agency seems to have. They've calculated that meeting Congress's mandate required putting away an extra $5.6 billion a year. That is equivalent to imposing a tax of about 8% on the Postal Service's revenue. That, of course, is very, very difficult for any place to do. A for-profit company. Imagine if you got UPS to do it, or FedEx, right? If they had to do 8%. Oh, they'd be screaming bloody murder. Oh, you can't do this to us. We're going to go broke. Well, post office is not operating very well under that mandate as well. So now, eventually, the USPS began defaulting on their payments back in 2012 and lost $62.4 billion between 2007 and 2016. And its own inspector general attributed about $54.8 billion of that to having to pre-fund retirement benefits. Without that, look, the post office would still be would be fine, right? But it would have spent at least part of that last decade doing even better for itself, perhaps enough to boost pay for its mail carriers. Instead, we've got this crisis, which was engineered so that the post office would fail and then be replaced by a private entity, right? So now, before he quit his job, Servin said his family was barely cutting it as Dejoy started implementing those changes. He said all of a sudden, Trump brought in Dejoy, somebody who's never carried mail. He just waltzes right in and starts making these changes to sabotage. Servin also said that losing overtime, quote, just made the post office such a mess as workers struggled to do their jobs within a certain time frame that was just not achievable. Mike Stevenson, president of the Pennsylvania Postal Workers Union, said that the slowdown in mail delivery is directly linked to the cut in overtime. Mail doesn't get sorted late at night or dispatched early morning, sits in the office until the next day, said Stevenson, who started working at the post office in 1981 before he retired. That mail, by the way, piles up and is left in the aisles of the sorting offices, requiring workers to have to navigate through that and squeeze through the machines in office spaces while also trying to maintain social distance rules because, the pandemic. It's a safety hazard, Stevenson said, along with everything else right now. He said that once the mail gets dispatched, the carriers also face another challenge. With no overtime, they can't reach all the houses in their route. And, of course, that mail gets delayed to the next day. And, of course, all of this compounds, it builds up. And so it causes a really big problem. All of these cuts, according to Robert Helming, president of the Colorado Postal Workers Union, says while they claim to try to help the post office, is only going to hurt the Postal Service. And that's what it is. The post office is not a for-profit entity. It is a service. It is congressionally mandated, created by the Constitution. It is constitutional. And so they are a service that is essential, necessary to this country. And yet Donald Trump and the Republicans, they're going to war with the Postal Service first under George W. Bush to try to, bring in more private carriers and in order to make a profit for them. And now by Donald Trump, who has stepped up their assault on the post office by literally just saying, we're not going to fund it because, political reasons. I could lose if we do vote by mail. So that's what I just want to shut down the post office to make sure that you don't vote by mail. This is an attack on a public service, a public good that has 91% approval rating. And yet Donald Trump is not losing in the polls. He's not losing ground because of this assault. And he should. So now, one more here from Helming. He says this, quote, it's about that disabled veteran getting his medication. It's about that retired person was 85 years old and has limited mobility, waiting on their social security check or their medication in the mail. That's why it's important. That's why we're fighting for this, to save the post office from Republican mismanagement. And really, you can't really call it mismanagement, right? Because this is done on purpose. They take an agency and they defund it, which in this case didn't happen, but normally they do. In this case, they heaped a whole lot of extra responsibility on it to pre-fund those retirement benefits in a way to basically try to shut it down, and then make it, once you make it not work, they can say, hey, look, government doesn't work. We should privatize. We should give this over to UPS or FedEx. Can you imagine? Like, I can see a world where now you have to pay to get delivered junk mail and bills. And if you don't pay the, whatever thing that they engineered to try to replace the post office for you to get your mail, if you don't pay it, well, you don't get your mail. I could see this happen under the right wing, leadership. Because again, it's all about trying to sabotage government in order to enrich themselves and their donors. And so this is a bad situation. By the way, one more thing about the stress of working inside the post office at this point. Helming adds, I get reports from the people I represent that management's always screaming and yelling at them that they've got to work faster. And so what's that going to lead to? Cut corners, unsafe practices, accidents. I mean, we don't know. But it's a bad situation. And it is something that Congress could fix if they gave a damn. And look, Pelosi finally is calling back the House from their vacation. But here's the thing, right? So look, while I say this is Republicans' fault, and it mostly is, the Democrats could have also fixed these funding requirements a long time ago when they had a supermajority in Congress. It was a short time, but they could have been like, you know what? Let's remove this act that Bush and the Republicans put in to pre-fund these retirement benefits and fix the post office. They could do that, but they didn't. So I kind of blame them for not taking this up when they had a chance. It's letting this problem fester through inaction and allowing Republicans to help destroy these vital institutions in order to help their donors. It's almost like you can go back to the hubris argument, right? Whereas like Democrats are always dumbfounded when a Republican wins, especially on extreme conditions. Like, oh my God, how could this have happened? How could George W. Bush have beaten Al Gore? How could that? It must have been because he was too far left. Oh my God, how could Donald Trump have beaten Hillary Clinton? I know, it must be Russia, Bernie bros, all that stuff. And she's too far left. We need to pick Joe Biden this time because, interestingly enough, Hillary Clinton on some policy positions was actually more progressive than Joe Biden. And it might end up being the same problem in this election. So this is not good. It's only going to get worse until we can save the post office and undo the damage that these Republicans have done. But it's actually going to take politicians who care, who are progressive, who actually want to do the right thing and fight for the post office.